Figures. And we're live. Greetings and welcome to my channel. Hope all is going well today. Um, we are going to be tonight talking about omens, manifestation of metaphors, signs and symbols, and the unicorn that I saw the other day. That's part of what brought this on. And on the last live over the book club, we were talking about shamanism, and I got into the idea of how everything is seen as a metaphor. And I wanted to talk about that not in relation to chaos magic or Peter Carroll, but just from my own understanding. Good evening, Black Unit Griffin. Good to see you. Um, like I was saying, one of the things that brought on tonight's discussion about um, manifestation and metaphors isn't just from our discussion last week, or not last week, but the other day with the book club about the shamanism and the manifestation of metaphor. We're going to talk about that, but also I feel like I technically saw a unicorn yesterday, and so I really wanted to talk about that. And I feel if anything is an omen, seeing a unicorn has to be a good omen of some kind. Now, what I mean by I saw a unicorn, and I'll probably tell this story a few times tonight. Yeah, indeed. Um, so what happened was, good evening, Romstead. Hey, Max. Um, the unicorn was disguised as a one-horned deer, I suppose you could say, just to be fair and clear. But I had been doing some stuff in the garden, or what was I doing over there? Actually, I'd been doing my stick exercises that I do on one of the what I call a whacking post. Hello, my love. And I just finished doing that, so I suppose I did have a little bit of adrenaline in my system. And I put the stick down, I went through the fence, and there's like a compost pile and a rosemary bush, and then my little frisbee golf thing. It's like I have like a practice frisbee golf net or hole, whatever they call them. So I grab one of the frisbees and I'm walking up towards the compost pile, which is just right there. And there was this unicorn, which at the time I didn't see as anything but a deer. It came jumping out and we right there in front of me. I got startled, kind of tried to throw the frisbee at it, but like something in my arm made me throw the frisbee directly into the ground. I'm glad I didn't hit the unicorn. And then I'm supposed to chase the deer out. So I did start to bark, but as I was going, I realized it only had one horn and it's a spike. So it's just literally one horn coming up, and it rather than being at a point, almost looked like a flat spot on the very top of it. I think a brown unicorn indeed, with a fuzzy horn because it was still in velvet. So its horn was all brown and fuzzy still, but there's only one, and I don't think it's in the center. I think maybe the other I think it's off to one side. I think something happened. But either way, I saw a unicorn. And we kind of, like I said, jumped out there. I threw the frisbee down. And we just kind of looked at each other for a second, and then it sprung off. And I halfway remembered I'm supposed to bark at the deer because the deer are always trying to eat our garden up. But fortunately, I didn't bark too much. I didn't bark a bunch at the unicorn, and I won't be in the future. If I see the unicorn again, I mean, I'm still going to keep it fenced out of our out of the garden area, but indeed. Um, I feel like a unicorn is one of them, very much one of them manifestations of a metaphor. Yes, it's also a manifest. I believe Diana and Artemis may have some connection to unicorn. I actually don't, because I don't pay a lot of attention to the gods and goddesses. I don't necessarily know which ones are attached to unicorns, but I do very much understand the common theme and metaphor of what a unicorn is. Um, at least in my understanding of it. But to me, it is very much one of them manifestations of a metaphor in that people are looking for, well, I think this is maybe why people have lost some of the understanding of the unicorn is it's a manifestation of the primal innocence, right? We're talking about a wild animal, a noble wild animal that is fey. It is something that it makes me think of clear streams of clean water and purity, right? And eventually you get this idea that only a unicorn will only approach a young maiden, but that's actually gets in there a little later on in the mythology. This is something, I mean, Europe got obsessed with unicorns at one point. There was an entire thing where they were just, well, I don't remember the history of it all very well, but they actually had all kinds of stuff where they were getting different things for unicorn horns, and it was a huge trend. It was bigger than Labubu, or like Beanie Babies were in their day, and people just wanted unicorn horns for all kinds of stuff. And in my opinion, one of the things they went after is essentially a unicorn. That's the narwhal. As far as I'm concerned, that's just a unicorn that went in the water. Yes, the narwhals did suffer because, well, anything suffer when they go after its horns. Um, Unicorns, to me, just because we're going to get this one right off the bat, are unicorns real? It's one of the things I asked in there. And to me, yes, just as real as anything else. They are a manifestation of a metaphor. Sometimes they're one of them things that on the material plane, their existence needs to be helped along. That creation, um, what's the word I'm looking for here? They need a they need a material form on which they can project their manifestation, like a one-horned deer or a narwhal or any of these things like that. This is part of how such things come into our world. It's the same reason that when we are taking on the role of a god that plays a ritual, that plays a part in a ritual, taking on the role of a god in a ritual, we put on the mask to take on that role, to allow that metaphor to manifest within us so that we can work within the channel of this essentially a wearable tulpa that we've created in the metaphor. But that gets a little twisted because even those gods often become self-aware, independent beings, but unicorns are more than that, right? They are a thing that became propagated out of a concept. Just like many fey beings. Fey beings didn't originate from a material ancestor, right? They originated from a concept. They are all of them manifestations of a metaphor of some form of beauty. And the unicorns, like I said, it's that idea of primal innocence, an innocence that isn't um, vulnerable in some ways, because the unicorn is also seen as strong and powerful. That's why I use that word primal when I talk about the innocence. And the material things that allow a unicorn to manifest can be very delicate. This is something that is a place of clear streams and meadows, right? That crisp, cold mountain stream water. That's one of the things it makes me think of. Later on, they began, like I said, getting this idea of only a unicorn will only approach a young maiden. But that's because with the twisting of things that happens as we got pulled into strange paradigms where certain things that were neither good nor bad, or I guess actually good in the end, part of creation, things that create life, like sex, began um, becoming seen as bad. We got put into mental paradigms where that was part of purity, right? Is whether you were sexual or not. So then it had to be that was like packed in there, right? And I'm having trouble coming up with the words for that. Unfortunately, no, I didn't get any photo or video. Um, a lot of the animals that come around here tend to come back. So I will be hoping to get a video or picture of the unicorn at some point. Because it'll probably be back. Like the deer around here, like I said, it's one of the things I do is try to chase them off. And not this winter, but the winter before, there was, or the fall actually, there was this buck that kept coming into the yard, and I would bark at it and chase it off. And it got more and more used to this. And towards fall, as it started getting towards rut, I was beginning to think I might get in a fight with the deer because it would start like getting ready, like, kind of make a stance for a minute before it decided it better run. And one day, this actually got so close that I think it would have happened if I hadn't barked right when I did. That same compost pile, and it was big and tall at that time. And I could hear the deer over by the compost pile, but it was dark. So I figured I was going to sneak up and get real close before I barked so I could really scare it. So I go sneaking up on the compost pile, real quiet, like in the dark. And just as I go to bark, I suddenly realize that deer's on the same side of the compost pile as me. So it's like right there, like right next to me. And it like freezes and starts to panic. And then it even kind of started to put his head down so I could see it was getting scared. But when it did that, I barked as loud as I could. And rather than coming forward, that made it immediately jump in the air, which made it realize it could leap over the compost pile. So it leaped up into the air and ran back into the woods. And yeah, it's kind of fun having to chase the deer off, honestly. But like I said, the unicorn, I wouldn't have barked had I realized sooner that what I was looking at. But I suspect it'll be back. I suspect it will be back, and I will try to get some pictures. Okay. So, um, like I said, one of the things I really wanted to talk about today, especially, is back to this idea of the manifestation of metaphors and how that is, um, well, it's also that the deer here are kind of used to people, you know? Yeah, I'm able to sneak up on them some, but it's also the deer here are just very used to people. The 707 is a forest that's right on the edge of the house here. People walk through it all the time, and the deer will go into people's yards and eat their gardens. Yeah, they don't spook real easily. I have to bark in order to get them, in order to scare them a lot of the time. Other time, if you don't bark, they'll just stare at you until you run at them, like waving your arms or something. But anyways, yeah, I wanted to get more into this idea of how there is a metaphor for everything, and that things manifest through metaphor and the symbolism that we use in that to create spellcraft. Um, Thought a lot about this. You think I'd know exactly where to start, but I'm struggling just a little bit with how to get this off the ground. Okay. Um, we're gonna start with the word Manitou. Indeed, Max. I felt like it was a very magical moment once I realized I had seen a unicorn. I was super excited. I came in the house like, Felix, I just saw a unicorn. Very cool. Very excited about that. I feel like that's got to be a good omen of some kind. I do have a lottery ticket that Felix bought the other day that's tucked into Joshua Witterson's shirt there, which apparently I've decided just now to just go ahead and start saying his name. You know, he doesn't have a face yet. And but it's not time to talk more uh about him. So, anyways, gonna start with the word Manitou. That's a good place to start out this conversation. Like I said, the word has several definitions, and as separated as I am from a lot of that, there might be parts of this that I'm missing. But this is the word as I know it. This is what I have lived. I certainly know the what it is to be born different. Yeah. But the word means mystery, it means sorcerer, it means turtle and spirit, right? And it's the interconnectedness of these words where I was first taught about this concept. The idea that there is a shell, a turtle shell, right? And we've all heard this before about how a turtle shell, or about how we're all on the back of a turtle, right? And this one don't involve the elephant. This I hadn't heard about the elephant. Not but Joe don't know what the heck an elephant is. At least they didn't back then. Um. Anyways, the way I was told this is that we're not on the shell; we are in the shell, and that the shell of the turtle is a metaphor for that connecting of the energy. We are the shell. We are the connectedness of everything. And the turtle is, like I said, a metaphor for this concept. Yeah. And within that is the mystery and the story. The story is a huge part. Everything has context. Every moment. That's what they mean when they say things about everything is connected. And, the same metaphor can be seen as a web, right? You can see it as a web if you prefer spiders over turtles. Whatever way you want to call, whatever way you want to see this. Like most often, I refer to it as a tapestry. And that's um I suppose a lot of past life influence. And it's just the one that makes the most sense to me. But we begin with this metaphor of the turtle being connected to the mystery and the weaving. Hey, Melissa, glad you could make it. And yeah, okay. So I feel like I'm getting a little stoppy starty here already. So what I'm trying to say is that concept of everything being connected, everything woven together, also can also be seen as context in a story. Yeah. I've often referred to this as the litany, the recording of all the different stories that have ever been. of every object. And everything has a backstory. Everything has context. Everything has been something else. Even the line of plastic cups that you order at a grocery store, right? They're all look exactly the same. They're all made out of plastic. Well, that plastic is made from fossil fuels. There's all kinds of backstory in the things that were used to create the oil that plastic was extracted from. There's a huge backstory, individual bit to all the individual particles making up that cup. And it seems so uniform, so contained, so controlled. But even in that line of styrofoam or plastic cups that you buy at the grocery store, every single one has a context and backstory. There is a hidden individuality in everything. And this is what allows things to flow. This is how things move. And like I was talking about before with the metaphors, it's everywhere, right? And we use this kind of logic all the time, whether we realize it or not. The whole idea of the metaphor is part of what's going into as above, so below. The idea that things are connected to other things like them. That's part of this same connection of concepts, right? Like when people believe that kidney beans were good for your kidneys because they're shaped like kidneys. That's not a very common example, but there is a thing there with a whole belief system around, or not belief system. I guess it is a belief system. There's a whole thing with the idea that you eat things that look like the parts of your body, and those are good for your parts of your body. And there's some truth to this. Like walnuts are great for your memory, and English walnuts look like brains. If you've ever cracked one in half and gotten a full half rather than the splits that you get at the store, but that one's a bit silly. But it's just uh, it's an example of the type of thing that I'm trying to talk about here. Let's approach it from a little bit different angle. Yeah. Um, Plato has the idea of the forms, and each form is a concept of a thing, and that is part of what I'm getting at. There is a form for everything, right? And it's not because these forms have been created, though some of them have. Some of them in our collective consciousness, like the classic example of a chair with Plato. We have made the idea of a chair. And a chair isn't exactly a metaphor, but it's a concept. It's an idea that has been created into many different um forms. Forms is a bad word. There is an idea that has been manifested in many different ways, right? You got the chair I'm sitting on here, got another chair over there that's completely different. You've got banana chairs, all these different things, and it's just something that we can sit on. But there's still a core concept there of what it is. And there are concepts for, man, the words for this are difficult. There is a concept for every aspect of reality, right? Like an understanding of what it is that goes beyond just our collective consciousness. There's well, I talked before about the spirit of different things, and that's getting closer, right? There's Now, I thought this was going to be a lot easier to use words to explain. Oh, I'm drinking a little bit of Saint Germain's tonight, but I'm going to be doing a lot less. I feel like last Saturday I got a little too drunk. We tried to do the sorcery self defense stuff, and I was like, oh, I can't really do this anymore. Okay, so the concept, the concepts connect to each other and create context for how a moment manifests. And it's by isolating understandings inside of that that we are able to move around the metaphors and how they manifest. I mentioned before about gods in mythology. This is, well, they're the perfect example, right? Each one of these gods is a metaphor for a different aspect of life people are living. Like the god of storms, is often a god that is stormy and angry and unpredictable. Not always, but that tends to be how they are seen. Gods of ice are cold emotionally. Gods of fire are often angry and hot-headed, like Hephaestus. Um, they are metaphors for whatever it is that they are connected to. And often they behave in ways that are similar to the element that they are connected to. And we place these metaphors on all kinds of different things. I talked last time about the great sturgeon, right? Which is there are these rogue waves in the Great Lakes, especially Gitchagumi. The Great Lake. I cannot. All of a sudden, I forget the name of Gitchagumi, and it's Lake Superior. Sorry. Anyways, there are waves in that they call rogue waves, and we actually do have a geological understanding now for what can cause these rogue waves. But there are waves that go against the other ones and take out entire ships sometimes, or canoes back in the day. But whatever they were, we created a belief around this idea. We gave them the wave a metaphor by calling it the great sturgeon, and that gave us a way to petition the sturgeon and do things to try and get it to not happen while we were on the water. And it worked, right? It worked for us. And that's how this whole thing about metaphors works when we're trying to change things with it, is that we give a concept or thing that we want to work with a metaphor. We find a metaphor for it that gives it a form, that gives us something we can petition and work with. But it needs to be something that resonates with the idea. You just can't decide that the wind is a let me think of something. I'm trying to think of something that I couldn't find a way to work resonate, because everything, it breathes, or you couldn't decide that the wind is a stone or a rock golem, right? And try to petition a rock golem to affect to work with the wind. You'd have to find something that's connected to that. You need something that is flowing with that form, right? The form, like I mentioned earlier, there's a concept of wind and what it is. And so you're going to need a metaphor that fits that form, but then is also something that you can find a way to reason with. But I wanted to get beyond that and talk about how reality manifests as metaphors and continues within that. And the best way to start with that, even though it's back to the idea of the Manitou and the mystery and interconnectedness of all things, but how that, right? This is one of the places where what I was taught is different than the things that I hear out in the world, right? About um, the culture that a lot of this knowledge that has passed down to me supposedly came from. There's a lot of weird missing gaps in like the common history that I hear about these same people, but I don't know. I think maybe my family line had its own stuff. Who knows? Either way, I was shown something very similar to an eight-pointed star, like a chaos star. My first pouch had an eight-pointed star on it, and I was given this whole explanation about essentially duality and how each one of those points represented opposing forces. And that as those forces opposed each other, it was never quite even. So that would create motion within the star, and that motion of it wobbling eventually becomes rhythmic enough that it begins to spin, and we have a spiral. And that spiral is part of the metaphor that makes up my entire understanding of, well, magic in general and especially chaos magic. This is part of the reason when I got to chaos magic and I saw that same eight-pointed star with um, the same types of concepts addressed around what the 8 points mean, I was immediately hooked. I mean, when I saw a chaos star, somehow I knew what that was. I suspect that's past life stuff. I'm pretty sure when I was Freaky Freddy the Fry Man, or probably my name was probably Frederick Fryman. Either way, I called myself Freaky Freddy the Fry Man in my last life. Um, I suspect he was in. I suspect I was into chaos magic then too. I think that's why I knew what an eight-pointed star was. But that bit about the duality in the star and stuff, this was told to me by my father and by one of the people that I don't remember their names even anymore because I was a little boy and they were drunk and they just were trying to load information off onto me basically. They talked about that and how the 8 points would wobble and move and make a spiral that spun. Apparently I need to do my first intermission already. Be back in just a moment. Okay, I return. Okay. So, um hopefully this week I will do a video on the sorcery self-defense stuff that we missed last week. This also just wasn't a good setup for me to stand up and try to show you how to wield a staff or anything like that. Like Joshua Wooderson's got my dream staff in the back there. I did want to get into some of that and explain the more material aspects of wielding a magical staff, but I don't think I need to be live for that. I think it's better if I'm not, in fact. And it's just bad angles for it here. So hopefully I'll make a video this week about that, and then maybe we'll talk about it in the following Saturday live. But no guarantees on that. I get kind of overwhelmed during the week sometimes. Anyways, back to the topic at hand, and I want to cover some of the stuff that we did on the last live, just for those that weren't there. Most of the people that are talking in the chat were there for this, but I'm just going to go back over some of it. And I'm really glad you got something out of that thing with the metaphors, Max. It always makes me happy to know that I've actually helped someone understand a concept better, and spread the magic of the understanding of magic. Okay, so I'm very pleased by that. That is great. Oh, my mind dropped what I was gonna say next. See, now I can't blame the alcohol. I guess technically. I blame the pot, everybody believe me, but my God, you should see what it's like. You should see what I'm like a couple days without this stuff. I can't remember anything. Okay, so like I said, back to the topic at hand. Okay, spirals. That's where I left off. Was with these spirals. We can see this metaphor manifest on every realm, right? When we talk about all the time about how things happen in cycles, things go in circles, things people even tend to think of time as cyclical. Everything tends to go in a spiraled pattern, right? It's not really a circle. There's another important bit there. We talk about it being a cycle or a circle, but it's not. It's a spiral, because things do tend to follow a certain pattern. We have eons, and each eon tends to follow certain patterns of how it goes and how one eon progresses into the next. But we're not in the same place at the end. We are either a little bit higher or a little bit lower, depending on how you want to see how the spiral works. But when we understand the spiraled nature of patterns that manifest, then we begin to see them more clearly, right? You can see how things repeat, how these patterns go over and over. Good. Yeah, it does seem like your week is you've had a rough week, Max. Yeah. I feel like I knew I feel like something I used to know about how to kill black mold, but I can't remember. I was about to give you some advice about black mold, but my brain dumped it. And if you're renting the apartment, you probably don't want to be painting it. But Kills brand paint does kill black mold. If you have to paint over it, get the same color, use Kills brand, but also don't Get it ventilated and don't be hanging out in that room afterwards for a while because stuff's strong. KILZ kills mildew. It's a good it's a synchronicity, right? The stuff isn't they don't call it kills because it kills mildew, but it does kill the mildew. Anyways, I said mildew, I meant black mold. Sit that down. Okay. So, um yeah, that is part of the core form of how every moment manifests. I talked before about the weird and the spinning and the turning, and it is the twisting of threads that weaves the tapestry. So all of the patterns that we see will be slightly circular in nature. The spirals that twist round each other. And as each one interconnects with the other, they affect one another. And this is what creates the cohesion of how a moment manifests. They talk a lot lately about this non duality. But what we need to understand about non duality versus duality is they are both perspectives. Understanding that non duality is a thing does not make duality go away. Yeah, I mean, there you go with the metaphor for it, right? The black mold was a metaphor hiding behind the wall, growing in secret where you couldn't see, was a metaphor for parts of that relationship, right? And that's kind of like what I'm talking about with the saying the omens and the metaphors. This holding of forms or even metaphors, it affects how things manifest. This is literally what we're doing when we're casting a spell. Is we're creating the metaphor so that the moment will form. Also, as a moment forms, it will create its own metaphors. And that's how divination works, right? They're kind of aspects of the same coin, or two sides of the same coin. We create metaphors to make a moment manifest, but by perceiving the metaphors that are being manifested by moments, we can be given insight into what is going to occur. And, you know, we don't have to create perfect metaphors. Just like I've talked about before, when we draw a sigil, it's best, in my experience, if the sigil looks like what it looks like its intent. Other people claim the opposite, especially Peter Carroll when we were talking about in the book club there. He talks about how it shouldn't look anything like it, how you don't want to be thinking about it. And I think if he found that to be the case, I strongly suspect that was a problem with his own version of the psychic sensor. It's a problem with the paradigm with which he perceives the world. Because that's exactly what he's trying to get past, even when he's talking about that. He's saying you got to get past the psychic sensor by not allowing yourself to think about what is going on. Now, something I wanted to say about that psychic sensor stuff, though, that is kind of going to contradict everything I just said. But, duality, right? Duality is important. Um, there is the psychic sensor that is your personal psychic sensor. And then there is a resistance from the collective consciousness that is also tuned into that. And you need to be able to break through that. But the thing is that's only one, like let's think of the collective consciousness Um, let's see. What am I trying to say here? Yes, like we'll use a metaphor here of a radio, right? Your brain is like a radio, and there's the collective consciousness, the collective conscious that is the FM band. And there are different frequencies within the band itself, right? It holds so many bands, but there are many collected consciousnesses out there that we can tap into. There are groups of people that believe magic is real. And when you come from one of those communities, you're constantly attached to it. Or if you connect yourself to one through the internet, or through some kind of meditation and understanding until you simply find that wave and connect to it. So that even though you're surrounded by people that don't believe in magic, perhaps, you are connected to a consciousness that does. That helps you get around this. Otherwise, uh, Peter Carroll is talking about how make it not like the intent. But that isn't going to get past that larger barrier. That doesn't affect that. That only affects you. That only affects your own mental consciousness. So when it hits that larger piece, whether it looks like it's intent or not, isn't going to be the primary thing. Or perhaps it is, in that it looking like it makes it more convincing of it doing what it is supposed to do. If it looks like what it's supposed to do. While if it doesn't look like what it's supposed to do, perhaps his idea is that it just simply filters through. But there's still the resistance to the whole concept that you're having to get past as it manifests onto the material plane. Because, like I said, there's your inner psychic sensor, and then there's a collective conscious sensor. And that's partial part of why secrecy often matters, and why you have to be careful who you tell your magic spells about. And like, well, sometimes the sigils that I talk about on here, I don't reveal what they are. I wanted to read this out loud. I just didn't get a chance to do it till now. I'm all right revealing that my favorite protection sigil I've made is based on a hug design wise. That makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. If that's a place that makes you feel safe, or perhaps even holding the person in place. Either way, I can see ways where that resonates. Um, and that's kind of the idea, right? Like if you feel safe in that moment of that hug with that person, that's a metaphor for safety. That's a metaphor for being protected. And essentially what I'm saying is our sigils should be a symbolic metaphor for what we intend. This gets more within the flow of the collective conscious, because as much as there is resistance to magic within the collective consciousness, there is always some acceptance of it. There is always some allowance for miracles if they're miracles that make sense, if they're miracles that have meaning and context in a way that the flow can accept. And that's why sometimes what I will do with a sigil, especially one that looks like its meaning, without telling people the meaning, I will put it in places where it might be seen. I've even put sigils in places with the intent that someone would come across them, find them, and wonder what they were, as a means of charging it outside of myself, and more actually even releasing it from outside myself, because now you've got someone that is not me, has no actual connection to the sigil, thinking about the symbol and allowing it to another access point to the overall flow. Okay, so I feel like there's a lot more people, and I told the unicorn story early on. So those of you that have already heard it, bear with me. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell the story one more time about the unicorn that I saw today. I'll probably wind up telling it a couple times because people come in and out. But anyways, um, as I said, the deer or the unicorn was disguised a bit. And that's where we go with that whole psychic sensory things and the fact that metaphors that do not have a physical form need a material form to project their existence onto. And so things may be perceived a little bit strangely. Now, what happened was I was in the garden doing one of my training sessions with one of my less nice staffs, but same length of piece of wood. I'm out there practicing how to switch hands, that sort of thing. Like I said, I am going to be doing a sorcery self defense video on that fairly early or fairly soon. And we'll talk about how to do that because there is an important connection to working with the dream staff and knowing how to make it work. Like, having them other parts of it, having it flow and becoming connected to you. Training with it physically helps with that. So we're going to discuss all that. Do have a few videos on it already. If you go back a few years in my channel, you'll actually find something about how to wield the dream staff. But I want to update that, go through that some more. But either way, I was doing that, and then I came out of that part of the garden. Now, as I come out of that part of the garden, there's a gate which I went through, and there is a frisbee golf. I don't know what the heck to call it. Practice hole, net, whatever. And I picked up one of the frisbees out of it. And then beyond that, there's a rosemary bush just ahead of that, and a compost pile, and then some more bushes. And I came walking up to the rosemary bush with the frisbee in my hand, intending to get up a little bit farther and turn around. I was gonna play some play some frisbee golf real quick. And just as I got past the rosemary bush, I hear something jump, and I look right in front of me, and a what appeared to be a deer with one horn jumped right in front of me and like turned and looked at me. We both kind of froze for a second. And because I'm all hyped up with adrenaline and I'm supposed to be chasing deer out of the yard, but first that's all I'm thinking I see is a deer. I went to throw the frisbee, but something made me throw it directly into the ground instead of actually hitting the unicorn with the frisbee. And then that got it to move, and it unfroze and jumped and started running away. And I did bark at it just a little bit before I fully registered what I had just seen. So I saw a unicorn disguised as a one-horned deer. The horn is just a single spike, but it doesn't end in a point. It looks like it's been almost looks like a pedestal sitting on top of its head, and it's still in fuzz. So I feel like that is a very close material manifestation of a unicorn. Like I said, it does need a material form on which to project. And yeah, it is definitely, I see, as a good omen for also a clear path. Yeah, that's another thing that unicorns often are doing is leading one to the path that they are supposed to be on. So I felt the very least this was a kind of assurance that I was that I am going in the way that I am supposed to be going. A unicorn is also at this point, and I suppose always has been part of the thing that about a unicorn is that it is elusive. It is hard to acquire. It is something that sometimes people choose to pursue. But even in the understanding of the unicorn, there I mean, even in the old myth of the unicorn, there is a hidden understanding in that one cannot chase a unicorn if one intends to catch a unicorn. A unicorn is not one of those things which can be sought directly. It is something which must be allowed to be. And I was going to get to that earlier, but I got a little sidetracked when I was talking about that primal purity, that clear mountain meadow. You can't make such a thing in the world. It needs to be allowed to be, right? Um, it makes me think of a line from a Neil Young song. He's talking about love, but it's the same sort of thing. The line is, "Love is a rose, it only grows upon the vine. Handful of thorns, and you know you've missed it. You lost your love when you use the word mine." And that's part of what I'm getting at here, right? With the or what we see with the unicorn is that it's not something that can be taken. It's not something that can be truly owned. I mean, even the whole thing where they were hunting the unicorn and trying to get its horn, it is a metaphor for capitalism. It is a metaphor hunting unicorns because even though the horn itself is, I mean, that's a metaphor for capitalism in itself because they're claiming this stuff is unicorn horn, but often it's ground up all kinds of different stuff that supposedly round up unicorn horn that they're selling to people, and people are hurting themselves because they're trusting this thing that it's supposedly unicorn horn and doing all kinds of crazy stuff with it because they think that this commodity can be given when it can't. But also, and even more significantly, is the metaphor that no one ever said. And that's the killing of the unicorn so that they can sell it. You can't really own a unicorn, right? You can't have a live unicorn. Even in the stories, if you try to capture one, it just dies if you try to keep it in captivity. So the only way to possess such beauty is to destroy it so that you can sell it. And that's capitalism in a nutshell. That's capitalism's view of the world right there. That's the whole thing is capture and destroy beauty so that you can sell its pieces for money. And there's even more of a metaphor in there. When I get back to that bit about only young innocents are the ones that unicorns will approach, and there's something in there with them believing that, right? There's a whole giant red flag I also appreciate that it showed itself in a form that clearly represents itself, but not the form one would expect. If we look for just what we expect, we miss things sometimes. Must be open. Indeed. Yes, there is an important metaphor in that I mean, I didn't see that I was seeing a unicorn at first. I tried to throw a frisbee at it. Unfortunately, part of my hand stopped my part of me stopped me, and I even feebly barked a little because I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. And it makes me sad that I barked at the unicorn. Frankly, I suspect it would be back, and I will be back, and I didn't do it any actual harm. Not that hitting it with a frisbee would have done it much harm, but that's capitalism right there. Capture something and destroy it to sell its beauty. That's yes. That's what they do to the wilderness even. Stabbed her and bit her with fences. I forget the line. I was trying to quote something from The Doors, but I forget the line. Therefore, true anti-capitalism demands protecting, creating, and uplifting beauty without money being the goal in making beauty. Indeed, indeed, beauty should be for its own sake. And I mean, that's Western civilization. They have this whole thing about man versus wild, conquering the wilderness, you know? And all of that. All of that is just an excuse for control and a fear of reality. Um, in a book that oh no, I can't remember the name of the book. Melissa's husband loaned it to me. I guess I can use your name. You just have your name on there. I try not to use people's name on the live, which is why I didn't say his name. Um, Anyways, it's a book about a talking ape, and like the whole book is about a guy having philosophical conversations with an ape. I'm so busy trying to remember that part that I forgot what my point was. Oh shoot! I totally forgot what my point was about the book. But yes, beauty must be made for its own sake. That is, well, I mean, there is no greater sake, right? Ismail, yes, that's the name of the book. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Um, hey, Odligren. Oh, I don't know how to, I know who you are, but I do not know how to pronounce your name. Odeligeren. Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. We were just talking about how I saw a unicorn yesterday. It was something about the capitalism, the givers and the takers. I mean, that's one of the books where they get that, where they talk about that, giver societies versus taker societies. Yeah, fair enough, Kane. Fair enough. I forget what the heck my point about one of the things Ismail said in that book was. It's a good book. Highly suggest reading it. I don't exactly agree with the end conclusion. Saw a dwarf in the woods once. Awesome. Okay. So, yeah, but yeah, that's the thing that strikes me the most about the unicorn and about capitalism in general. I've always seen that as that's what they do is capture things that are wild and beautiful so that they can be you have to destroy them and make them not as beautiful so that they can be sold. You have to taint, break them apart. That's the same gourd as before. It's a gourd that actually grew with a V for Vendetta mask tied to it, so that it would grow into the face. Um, there's a. It's too early. It's too late this year But hopefully next year I'm going to be taking some of the seeds from well, you can kind of see it there, that other gourd there. It's one that as it was growing, I continually carved my sigil into it so that it grew with my sigil on it. But those seeds I'm going to be planting for gourds next year, and we're going to put some of those in molds. Yeah, it works really well. If you actually, I just kind of came up with the idea on my own. And then afterwards, I found out that they've been doing it in China for thousands of years. Like they have all kinds of cool molds and little gourd bottles and stuff that they actually grow a gourd into a mold to have a bottle shaped just like, or a gourd shaped just like the bottle. It's pretty cool. I'm gonna try some stuff like that this year. Well, not this year. Too late. I've been very kept up doing all the paperwork and also stressing about the paperwork more than actually doing it. But it's that's finally all over. I've applied for the for the open work visa. I've got the spousal sponsorship paperwork all done up. So I should be able to concentrate a little more now. Now it's all just worrying. The Hawaiian drum gourds. Yeah, I suppose so. Gourds are one of the few crops that were everywhere. Everybody had gourds. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. I would be surprised if they didn't make it to Australia, but I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. But it's because they float, right? Whoever made them first, they got to the water and they floated around. People found them, found seeds inside of them, cracked them open, and planted them. So gourds wound up all over the planet. Yes, wizard weed, specifically super lemon haze. So I keeps me on topic. Well, I don't know if that's true. Certainly doesn't keep me on topic. Constantly off topic, but you know. So, um, as I was saying about the signs and symbolism, so busy all week. Um, well, paperwork's all done now. Yeah, I think it's um part of the archetype, right? Got to have a little pipe you smoke. I mean, in a lot of ways, the original concept of what the shaman is, that's another thing that they all had in common. Some kind of smoking, often of an ethnogenic substance to help trances. Even in North America, I mean, smoking a lot of tobacco, but also you can actually get quite a thing off of tobacco if you get enough nicotine. It's a dangerous way to go, but nicotine can get you, like, if you get enough nicotine in your system, nicotine is way more dangerous than you think it is. But once you get to a certain level of nicotine, just before it starts to really make you feel nauseous or right about, there's that moment where it is really good for the closed eye visualizations and for even inducing astral projection. But like I said, you got to be careful. Nicotine is way more dangerous than you think it is. Yes, watching the smoke float. That is what got me smoking cigarettes. Cool. Quilin and Pixiu, if I'm pronouncing that right. That's what got me on the dance. That's what got me to smoke the cigarettes. I was smoking pot long before before I was smoking cigarettes. But then, like, you know, I wouldn't have any smoke, and all my friends would be smoking cigarettes. I'd want to play with smoke too. So it wasn't really peer pressure that got me to smoke cigarettes. It was mostly that and that nicotine buzz that I was just talking about, you know? And I tried it and I was like, whoa, hey, this is an interesting phenomena. And then the next thing you know, I'm a damn cigarette smoker. But also, tobacco is such a commonly needed thing in what I'm doing that it make it pretty hard for me to quit smoking cigarettes because I have to have tobacco on me. You know, I have to use it for offerings. I use it for all kinds of stuff. Okay, so let's see, where are we going to pick up with this now with the metaphors? Um, I feel like I've hit a lot of the important points, but I want to go back over that before we begin moving into some of the other stuff that I wanted to talk about in that direction. So, all of mythology is metaphors, right? That is the point of mythology. This idea of metaphors is the core principle of what it is doing when we cast a spell. We create a metaphor for the moment that we want to manifest, even if that's just a sigil that looks like an intent or two candles that we light and then move closer together each night, one candle representing ourselves and one other candle representing the thing that we want. We create the metaphor symbolism of them coming together. We create a metaphor of that moment happening with the candles coming closer together each night as we light them. And that metaphor creates the form that makes that moment manifest. But there's more to this than that. This is the vital importance behind everything it is that we are doing is there is supposed to be a beauty in all things. This is what makes magic happen. Isn't just that metaphor that I'm talking about, but that metaphor is beautiful and interesting and artistic and an expression of the self and not just the ones that we use in our spells, which the more we make them like that, the more beautiful and dramatic that intent is, the more momentum is is in the more momentum that is going into into the spell, the more powerfully it will manifest. And it should also be in the way that we live if we want to be living a magical life. This is what brings magic back. This is what continues the manifestation. Every moment that you are alive sews another stitch in the web that tells the story of your life. And so the more magic, the more metaphor of self expression we place in every step that we take, the more power our magic is going to have. I like it. The squirrels. I have a servitor of a squirrel named Squiggles. They bring me things that I want if I feed them acorns or whatever nuts I find when foraging. It's a very cool idea. Omens, bugs, and Trojo horses could just explain time, place, and space. Um, I am. I mean, in a way, we could see all of moments as omens. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. You'd have to explain a little bit more. It's an intriguing statement. I'll give you that. So, yeah, that is the key to the whole bit there. And I was talking about earlier about how this is how fey beings evolved, including unicorns, fairies, all of those things that have that etheric form. They begin from a metaphor for beauty, a metaphor for playful innocence, a metaphor for all kinds of different concepts wrapped around beauty and fun and poetry, right? There is a poetry necessary in the creation of any etheric being. This isn't just the Fae, it's the Jinn, it's any of them. They're even if they be even after they have become full etheric races like the Fae or the Jinn, or I'm not just gonna start keep naming stuff off, but any of these categories, that is where they begin. This is where our soul, our individuality, even this is what creates our center core, is by finding that poetry that resonates with your perception. Indeed. Now, demons, of course, are more of an astral being. I believe we've discussed this before as well, but it's the same. It's still the same. It's just that demons and astral beings start on as an astral um, reaction within a primal force, but it's still a type of metaphor. It's a awareness that awakens within a force and becomes each individual demon. While the jinn, like the Fae, are etheric beings, and there is a metaphor behind the creation of each individual type of race of jinn, and then they began to breed amongst themselves. Same as the Fae. And, Fae being a bridge between the material and the astral, that makes well, interbreeding on either side of that extremely interesting, which we've talked about in some of the earlier videos. Constellations hidden in their sigils. Indeed, Max. This is a very it's an important point for those that aren't aware. And thank you, Melissa. Um, let's see. I feel like no, I didn't miss anything here. Okay. So, um, in the end, are unicorns real? Yes. I think I got into that a bit for a while there, but I mean, there's even like that philosophy debate, a very fairly famous philosophical debate about the existence of unicorns and how even from a logical standpoint, they have such an impact. They've affected history in so many ways, especially Europe during the unicorn craze, that they are as real as anything else, right? They do require assistance to manifest on the material plane. They began as a metaphor for primal innocence and truth. They're an incredibly beautiful concept. And like I said, they're also the unicorn hunt and craze was a perfect metaphor for capitalism. You know, we definitely just barely discussed this, but I just want to go back over that again. The idea of owning land, especially to me, I mean, you can have rights over a territory, right? But the idea of owning land is like you're trying to control it. You're trying to break it apart and strip it of its beauty so that so that you can have value, so that it can have monetary value. But the thing about monetary value in the whole money system is that you have to be able to take beautiful things and turn them into trash. You have to be able to extract the value from them and make them something that is something you can throw away and make it so nobody wants it anymore. If you can't turn everything beautiful eventually into nothing, then you can't sell it. And if you can, then you can only sell it once. So the whole thing, especially with people getting the unicorn horn and like snorting it and hurting themselves from, I mean, what the hell did they think was going to happen anyways? The same people are snorting mummies, I suppose. I don't know if I don't know if those crazes happen that close together. I'm not that good with the history of it all. But I don't know. It makes me wonder about what the omen I saw really means. With all that view of well, capitalism and the dominant paradigm that is currently subverting reality on this planet. Because we have a paradigm on this planet that isn't mythology but fantasy. There's no good metaphor. Well, no, actually, there's lots of good metaphors for capitalism, but they're all the things that are sick. The metaphor of how it behaves, or of something that is dying, something that is already falling apart. So we see this unicorn now at the end. And, I'm not saying society's going to crumble tomorrow, but, these things we see going on in the world, like I've talked before about how it's the dying gasps of a headless serpent, right? Especially after, with the way that with things that I believe happened, and perhaps that was a metaphor that I mean, if I'm half crazy or whatever, or there's more delusion in here than I realize, and perhaps what happened was a metaphor for the primal forces finally crushing that other view. but you can see it crumble before our eyes. I mean, the Christians have given up on Jesus to worship this Trump. The Catholics are changing their whole way, well, at least with the Pope. We got this Pope in charge. It's everything's changing at an exponential rate. It's like it really did create a vacuum. But either way, whether it had anything that whether what I and the Horde did had anything to do with it or not, the way these monotheistic paradigms and all of it, the way they're behaving, especially now, it's like they're in their death throes. And as the snake dies from having its head cut off, however that was done, it thrashes about and grasps blindly. But even as it falls, I am now shown that the unicorn survived. This is an omen. I feel that things are going in a new way. The unicorn was young. There was still fuzz on its horn. It was an omen of new growth, of new beauty, new truth. Okay, so let's see. What else do we want to talk about on this subject? I really feel like I had more to say on the metaphor thing, but we've covered it rather extensively. So, what else did I say we were going to talk about? Omens and signs. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about omens, which omens are metaphors. So basically, I mean, it's all the same subject in some ways. And obviously, we were just talking about omens, but there's some other things to be said there. One thing that's important, not everything is an omen. Just because you saw an animal doesn't mean it was an omen. There are times that stand out. If you see something that is considered a cryptid, something that's not supposed to exist, even if it is disguising itself as a one-horned deer, that's an omen. That means something. Even if it's just, like in this case, it's not like the thing presented itself to me, right? It's not like that kind of omen. Sometimes there are omens that you see that are simply a good sign, right? A hint that things are moving a certain way. And then there are omens where you feel the scene presenting itself to you. Like sometimes simply seeing a starling in the sky is an omen, even though you may see starlings every day. But there's a sudden perception of poetry. There's a sudden connection that you will feel in these moments, like the scene is presenting itself to you. And then that's how you read that moment, is as a metaphor. And I'm not saying there is a consciousness that is messaging you in these moments. It's just an alliance, an aligning, a moment where things have matched up just right. And I know that seems like, okay, well, what are the odds that things are going to match up without something choosing to do that into a metaphor that tells you a moment? Much higher than you realize, because this is how the threads twist. It is these connectedness of things and how each one bleeds just a little bit into the next that creates the cohesion of the tapestry, right? I talked before about it, how it's all spirals. If you get spirals spinning in all directions at the same time, they're going to twist into each other. They're going to interact. They're going to tangle. They're going to weave alongside each other and spin in sync, even as the complexity grows. Like I said before, whenever there is a close to balance, we get a wobbling that becomes a spinning and a motion, and it all turns, right? And I feel like I repeat those words, that concept constantly, but there's an understanding in it, yeah? There's a bit there that alls I can do is tell you the words, and then you got to just groove that last bit. It's simple once you accept how complex it is. And I don't even know if it's a extra grasping, but more of a just a fully taking in the idea, perhaps. But I always feel like I'm not fully communicating the thing. Like there's a piece that words just won't convey completely. And part of that is because how that combines, how those spirals spin and twist is going to be different from where you are positioned within the fuller weaving than I am. So even if I can nail down exactly, somehow to tell you exactly how it is from here, that's still not going to tell you where it is, what it is from where you are, right? We're each on a little bit different frequency, like I talked about earlier with that radio. Um, Another great metaphor that works out really well is the old school film projector. It's kind of funny how many of these things are connected to entertainment when in the end that is the ultimate purpose of existence is to entertain the audience of the all thing, because we too are part of that audience, and that's why we are here, is to entertain the fullest aspect of ourselves. So I suppose it's suiting that a lot of the metaphors are connected to entertainment, but there is a line of film, like the old school projector, right? And there are forms on the film. There are images, if you will, that then come up across the lens of the projector. And the projector is perception. And as each image is perceived, it gets broadcast out to create the view that we then all perceive. And oh man, I've gotten a little lost here. My metaphor got a little too complicated. Um, so yeah, we have the film with all the forms and images on it that are projected through the light of the projector onto the wall, much like Plato's idea of the forms. He would have his idea of the forms would have greatly benefited from knowing what a film projector was rather than images on a cave wall, right? With the shadow puppets. We're basically talking about the same thing. But that film is all of the possibilities of a moment. And that's where the metaphor gets complicated because it's not set in stone what the next slide will be, right? We're on the cutting room floor attaching images into the moment. And got a little lost there. Got a little lost there. Like, it is a good metaphor for how each moment manifests, like a projection on a screen. But I'm struggling with bringing how that is brought back into the main point of this live. I mean, it's another metaphor, but it's not. Anyways, apparently I need to do another intermission already. I will be right back, hopefully with a better explanation of what I was talking about. I'm back, and I finally remembered where we were getting with that. The wizard needed to do a quick intermission, but I have returned. Um, so I remembered where I was going with that with the video camera. It's interesting that a lot of the metaphors for how reality manifests are connected to the idea of entertainment when the full um, purpose, the ultimate idea of what keeps everything moving, keeps motion mattering, is entertaining the audience of the all thing, the audience of which we are all part. And let's see. Yeah, because when the other one we talked about also was radio and attaching the correct frequency. And each one of our minds is, in a lot of ways, like an antenna, right? When a brain is born, that manifests on the same, you could call it frequency, as your soul, your fullest self, then when that happens, that's how you become manifest in a material form. That's how you incarnate. If you just let it happen by chance. I mean, there are things you can do in between lives to affect when and where you're going to be born. But what you're doing there is doing things that are going to encourage a brain that's going to is going to encourage a brain to exist that has that frequency. Or sometimes we can wind up in ones that really don't have the right frequency. So the metaphor does break down a bit. Sometimes we wind up with an incarnate that is completely unmatched to our physical form. So the metaphor breaks down. There's even ways to, well, that's outside the scope of this video. Um, anyways, so the metaphor breaks down, but for the most part, it's a pretty good metaphor about a radio antenna and a frequency attaching to the brain, allowing you to be connected to the all thing. Now, sometimes you can get an antenna that the frequency is a little off, but it's picking it up anyways. It's like almost like a static channel. So the metaphor actually does still work pretty good because when you have that mismatch, there's that little bit of static in the line. And sometimes we can even use that to our advantage. That's why, you know, um, people who were born a different gender than their soul were considered sacred in the past, because having that little bit of static in the line allows you to hear hear bits and pieces of other frequencies. It's like when you're in between channels on the radio and you start hearing other pieces. So actually, the metaphor works out quite well. Okay, so um, I feel like I don't have a lot to say on the topic at hand. Doesn't mean the live is over. I have some other things to talk about. But if y'all have any comments, questions, or concerns about the unicorn or the metaphors, especially if there's anything in there that wasn't clear that you feel like there's something I could explain that would make it more clear, please let me know. I'm willing to discuss that in as great of detail as anybody needs. Wands and pointing fingers. They're pretty much the same thing. The reason that the wand, yes, directing things. Yes. The wand does help, especially for a lot of people, because in some ways, it's a metaphor for what you're trying to do of directing the energy, but also you literally just, it helps sometimes, especially depending on what type of wand you're using. But absolutely, they are both connected for the same things. And the evil eye. Hmm. See, the evil eye, in a lot of traditions, is something that's believed is just jealousy. Like it's not even necessarily caused on purpose. So that makes it really, so some of the stuff about protecting people from the evil eye, I don't know. Evil eye is a strange thing. To me, the evil eye, like the first thing I ever learned about it is how to make your face scary. And I'm not very good at doing it consciously, but I seem to have a pretty good one once I'm actually thinking that I'm about to get in a fight or something, because it seems to have worked on a few people. But But yeah, when I first heard of the evil eye as a small child, that's what I was told. My family calls it the Blakely evil eye. Supposedly, we all have a scary face. I don't have a good one that I can do consciously. I'm just not, I feel like I'm a really friendly looking person. So, it is what it is. Um, but it is interesting that the evil eye, the thing that the people use to protect from the evil eye, the Nazar, is an eye itself. It's like an eye that's supposed to draw, essentially break the eye contact needed for the evil eye to occur, or the staring. I guess not exactly the eye contact, but it's drawing away the directing of the eye, right? Because the evil eye needs to be directed. It's usually done through jealousy. Yes, that one right there. Thank you, Kate. Okay, so like I said, I do have some other things to talk about. Um, Next, we're going to talk about Joshua Wittershins here, who, like I said, I've decided to apparently to just go ahead and start saying his name. It's actually, I believe, Gaelic for clockwise, counterclockwise. A lot of you that practice Wicca, or any of you that practice Wicca or studied it at all, are probably familiar with the two words. First time I ever heard it was in first time I ever heard those words, at least in this life, was when I was studying with the Temple of the Inner Circle at the Bell Book and Candle under a lady who called herself Lady Morgana. Supposedly they were just teaching us Wicca, but what they were teaching us was actually mostly Welsh cunning. They use those terms together, Jeshua Wittershins, and I've thought of it as a name ever since. Now, I said before that I've been working on this spell for about 30 years because now I was 20 when I first heard those words, Joshua Wittershins. Like I'd read the words before, but I'd never heard them pronounced. I always thought it was Deosil, but apparently Deosil is pronounced Jeshua. Anyways, um, my altar servitor, which I've talked about many, many times, has been an organic process that has been developing an etheric form that is very much connected to me and has been allowed to have some autonomy, but is I've seen it kind of like almost like an AI connected to the altar and all of my workings, just to make sure everything's going smoothly, making sure everything's on track, keeping things going. And this is the same altar servitor that I created the servitor tanks for, and that helped rehabilitate the water spirit Ronaldo. And then I gave it a sigil, which there is a version of it that's actually attached to the chorus there behind me on the wall. And the reason we started using that symbol in connection with that was because of its etheric nature, right? And to get it more centered into that space of the in between and give it a more and stronger etheric form. And at the same time, while all of that has been going on, and I'll point out the shape of the symbol one more time, how it's two twists, and the one comes back around, right? This wasn't a conscious choice by me. But anyways, um, at the same time, I've been working with that name, Joshua Wittershins, for years in my writings. In fact, he's one of the main characters in my one of the in my novella that I've been working on. So apparently we're gonna. Oh, whoops! I punched that in wrong. I guess I am gonna plug one of my books here, one I haven't plugged very often. The title of the series, or the title of the full book, is Anarchy's Last Stand. Anyways, in there, what is going on? Oh, here we are. I'm probably gonna wind up editing this later on. So if you get it now, it'll actually be edition one. There will be other editions. But anyways, he's one of the main characters in the book. He is a chaos mage named Joshua Wittershins. And he is the like in the D&D book, in the D&D campaigns that I've worked with this character, and in the book, essentially what he was or is my avatar in those worlds. Like when I would DM Dungeons and Dragons sessions, I would use him as a way to be able to do whatever I needed to do in the thing. He was like a D&D character that was an NPC essentially, controlled by me, the DM, that could do essentially anything. One of his powers even was to ignore dice rolls. Like he can just do what he wants. He doesn't actually have to roll the dice to cast a spell. But he's also a main character in a bunch of the stories that I have written, including the Faerun saga in the Anarchy's Last Stand book that I've put here. Let me go ahead and pin that. It's $2.99 for an ebook, or like I forget how much for the hard copy, like $9.99 or something like that. Also some of my essays in there. But anyways, I've been working on this character and as him being my avatar, as him being, my way to enter into those worlds. And now, with everything that has been occurring, with the arrival of the horde and my further connection to the audience, I have found these two things aligning and connecting. And you'll notice with the sigil up there, what does it look? Okay, right there, that it is already a twist. So, like I said, when we're creating a servitor, one of the things that we tend to anchor it to is sigil. So with Joshua Wittershins, I'm creating not just a servitor or egregore or golem, but more of an actual astral familiar that will also be a wearable tulpa. And so his sigil is very similar to the altar servitor sigil, except for bringing them in. I hadn't realized I was going to be talking about this, or I would have been more prepared to draw it. Got a marker here. Just get a piece of paper. See, I always I'd like to draw it better looking than that. Find a better piece of paper. Um, okay, we'll just try again. Over here. That's the funny thing about this sigil. It's incredibly simple to draw, but it becomes complex in my mind, and that's part of the conditioning process. I am going to show it to you here in just a moment, but I'm getting frustrated with that. There it is on the wall right there. I've got it written all over the sigil wall. But I don't feel like trying to adjust the camera back and forth. But it's exactly as you would imagine it, right? It's a gestural spiral spinning out and going into a Widdershins spiral. One going in, one going out. And this is also, you know, a moment of polarity, of duality that I'm constantly getting obsessed with. Even before I ever heard the words Jeshua and Widdershins, I was always all about that. It has to do with the entering the eye of the storm stuff, even how I've learned to term one hand Jeshua and one hand Widdershins at the same time. So, what I'm creating then is a familiar that is also a wearable tulpa, but rather than with a servitor, how typically you're making something that is smaller than you, that you're squeezing down into. Jeshua Widdershins is instead a bridge, a form for me to fill into, to adapt to a fuller connection to myself, to my fuller self, to a greater alignment with my place in the audience, in the all thing, and bring me one step closer to becoming, creating myself. And I think that mostly makes sense about what I'm up to. And, I have this whole fuller idea about surviving death by becoming a wraith when I do finally lose this form. So, part of what I'm also doing here then is creating an etheric form for me to possess on the material plane once I have lost access to this material form. Because an astral soul can inhabit either one. We can inhabit a material form like this one here, or it is possible to inhabit um, more etheric forms, especially the more material they become. You know, even though the similarity between a soul and an etheric form is greater, especially if the etheric form is created with the purpose to be able to house the connection between, you know, the is created to house the actual soul, which it will be doing when I use it as a wearable tulpa to help expand my fullness of self and become the wizard Jeshua Widdershins as I grow larger, using him as a bridge to my fullest self. Then once I pass, I'll be able to once this body is passed, I'll be able to use that etheric form as the vessel to contain myself in from that moment forwards. So this is the beginning of a very large project, which I hadn't realized, but I've been working on since I was at least 15 years old when I first began creating the altar servitor itself. So that's one of my major projects that I'm working on right now. And pretty excited to see where that goes. It was just after I fully understood that I well, I can't say it was like I decided that in the garden and then walked out and saw the unicorn, but this has been one of them projects that rather than completely knowing what you're going to do when you start, it's just kind of all lined up. Everything's just found its way into place over time for this moment to manifest. And sometimes I feel like when I'm in these moments, what it is that my fuller self is guiding me into these steps of evolution that are necessary for them to exist. In order for me to get to that point in the form that I am at there now, things have to go along a certain path. And so I think that perhaps I am guiding myself towards this goal. And I feel like that whenever things line up this way, like all these different things that I've done throughout my life are suddenly all fallen together in place for the creation of Joshua Wittershins. And this isn't the only time that's happened, but when it does, these are significant things. Like the May 5th, 2012 thing, it was one of them things where everything lined up and fell into place. And I even thought other stuff was going on, but everything fell in the way, and dreams kept telling me that this is what it was. And now I'm finding myself in a similar position, only with the creation of a form. Now, this doesn't mean I'm going to be losing access to this material form anytime soon, just to be clear. In fact, ideally, I would like to manifest within this body, and we'll see where that goes. I'm not even sure what I mean by that, except for that, through this process, eventually fully merging my etheric form as it develops and my material form. I don't even know if that's possible or what that even really means. Sounds like, something you would hear one of the ancient emperors that trying to achieve immortality would be talking about. But don't worry, I'm not going to be drinking any mercury. So that's my biggest primary personal project at the moment. Um, with all this stuff going on with the servitor tanks and the connections to water that I have, I'm quite amused by the reflecting pool alignment. Yes, thank you, Melissa. That's exactly it. I'm trying to align with the audience, trying to align with the fullest aspect of myself. I'm not trying to say there was any rubber chicken or involvement of my kind in any way with what's been going on at the reflecting pool, magically speaking, but I do find it rather amusing. That aspect of it is part of what makes it so amusing to me. I do feel like it's a perfect metaphor. Yes, that's why I wanted to bring it up. I knew that there was something that this thing about metaphors it affects all of the collective consciousness, right? Because like the reflecting pool turning green in and of itself is pretty small, but it's a perfect metaphor for the whole big mess. It's a perfect metaphor for the entire presidency and everything that has gone along with it. And that's why everyone is so synced into it. You know, if it was just any other time, nobody'd care that the pool was green, really. I mean, there might be a couple political cartoons about it, some comment, but the way it's gotten the traction it has and everything connected to it is just such a metaphor. And then there's all that stuff with the frogs, right? Remember all the frogs in Oregon with the protests and stuff? And now there's a swamp just outside of his door. And I think yeah, he says he's going to drain the swamp, and now the real swamp's coming for him. Because that's another thing I've never appreciated as far as metaphors go, is the idea of the swamp being some bad place. Nah, nah, swamps are cool. Swamps are beautiful places. Swamps are that's where the frogs are, is in the swamp. And yeah, there's alligators in there too, and other things. And I suppose if there's leeches in the swamp, it is a little bit like politics, but I've never appreciated the comparison. And I feel like the metaphor of the swamp with all the frogs coming to bounce his ass out of the White House. I like it. It's pretty cool. It's an excellent metaphor. And I do feel like maybe that's something that could be worked with. I've been thinking on it for a while. But I certainly wouldn't want to be caught trying to put any kind of anything into the reflecting pool at this point, right? They're absolutely convinced that the evil anti-fascists have somehow made algae produced in this pool. I heard you finally got some kind of nano bubbler thing going, and maybe it's blue again now, anyways. I don't know. Either way, that shit was hilarious. Great metaphor. Um, like I said, I will be doing a video this week on the self defense stuff. We're gonna go ahead and grab this thing real quick and talk about how to wield the dream staff. But the angle is just not good in here, anyways. Important part to remember, though, is that this is a single handed weapon that you wield with two hands. It's constantly changing hands. Otherwise, people can slap your fingers. But no point in getting into that, even if we're not going to be demonstrating. There's just not enough. The camera's bad. The camera that I have in here is bad for that. The angles get weird. So we will hopefully film that this week. As a couple of shorts, perhaps, and maybe we'll even reshare them on the live so I can discuss them from here while we're talking about it. The reason that it matters for a sorcerer, beyond just the having a means of self-defense, which is, sorcerer or not, useful and a good thing to know, is that, like I said, there's that understanding of motion that comes with learning how to wield the staff, that allows you to really sync up with it and get that real flow and feeling from the staff of how to use it for anything. It gives you more respect, more connection, more rapport with the weapon, and allows you to see it as a weapon. And especially if are using your dream staff for astral combat or defense in your dreams in any way, then knowing how to wield it on the material plane as well is of vital importance. That being said, when I show the training exercises, and I'm actually going to be hitting a big tree stump, if you do that part, don't use your good stick for that because it will break. No matter how hard it is, it will eventually break. That's the problem with the art. There was a bit more on that. Where did I put that thing? Because we can talk a bit about the first part, and this is important for a lot of aspects of the craft, even with the working of energy. It's important to keep your hands to where you can keep them in sync with each other, even if we're not going fast like that. When we're doing the energy work, it's useful to remind ourselves of the connection between the two hands. And part of the way to learn to do that is, again, through, well, training. And it's the same type of training that is one of the first things that you need to learn to do to wield one of these properly. And that's, like I said, keeping your hands in sync with each other. And there are tricks, right, to be able to learn how to do that. Like I'm pretty good at it at this point. I'm getting way off the subject here, though, because we're supposed to be talking about metaphors and stuff. But like I said, I only have so much to talk about there. Something like this helps a lot. When you're trying to learn, it helps create the muscle memory and get you used to the idea of keeping your hands close to each other. And then you connect that with the visualization and actually putting the energy into your hands. But learning to remember to keep that connection, developing the muscle memory for keeping them close together. There's a hack for that, and it's using something like this, usually a little bit longer because you don't need them quite this close together. But that is stuff I actually should be waiting till the next live, till the sorcery self-defense live to talk about. But I added this to that playlist, and I wanted to at least throw a little something in. Okay, so let's see. What else is there? Things that are going on. I'm sure we all heard about Pete Hegseth removing Wicca and all earth-based pagan religions from the recognized religions of the military, and how much he's been pushing on those particular terms, earth-based pagan religions, and how much of a problem that they are. And this is concerning, right? It's not that long ago Nick Fuentes was calling for witches being burned at the stake. And now we have this. He's like afraid to say the word witch for some reason. But that's what he's talking about. You know, of course, the people in that camp are going to turn on us at some point if they're allowed to continue. But like I said, I think then people are in their death throes. I think we are getting towards the end of that. But at the same time, that's part of the reason I want to teach the sorcery self defense stuff as well. Is world could get interesting for a bit here, and it's better to know how to protect oneself than not. There are ways to use one's understanding of magic and magical prowess as defense, as well as learning how to use your tools for self defense gives you another connection to those tools and helps the momentum of your overall spellcraft. So it is definitely within the interest and scope of the channel to talk about these things. You know, I'm not going to share and talk about it, but I am going to go ahead and find that one about wielding the dream staff, and I'll put it up here. Oh, I must have spelled wielding wrong. Yep. Show all, because that doesn't see the one I'm looking for. What do you mean no matching videos? You just showed videos. I wasn't trying to look. I was trying to look. There we go. Okay. I do a couple of them in this one. How to wield a dream staff, hammer, or cudgel. Kind of a fun. It's a pretty good video. It's 37 minutes long. I don't know why I'm linking it here. I don't want you to go take off to watch it instead of watch me, but yeah, we'll go ahead and anyways, it's in there in case you want to go to it after the live. You can just tab it up or whatever until then. But yeah, in that one I show how to wield a dream staff, but I also show how to wield a warhammer, or yes, a hammer as if it was a warhammer, and a cudgel, which is similar to a how I was taught to wield a war stick, which is pretty much what's going on here, but it's also very similar to Irish cane fighting, which is why I called it a. Suppose I should have called it a shillelagh. I was going to call it anything, but I use. I'm not going to go dig it up. It's in the video. If you want to see it, it's the same. It's the same cudgel that I use in the Great Left video. I show how to wield it. Anyways, let's see. Been on for 2 hours, 19 minutes. I think I'm going to summarize what we've talked about again one more time. Tell the unicorn story one more time in case anyone is. Well, I think everyone is on here is probably some people that have been staying with me the whole time. So I don't know if we're going to tell the whole unicorn story one more time, but we will summarize everything, summarize the unicorn story at least a bit. So, the important parts to understand here is that a metaphor is part of how things manifest. this can be seen in many different ways. Even the manifestation itself is a metaphor, which we often perceive as a tapestry, the weaving of a thread. It can be seen as an eight-pointed star that wobbles from its from its not quite perfect balance that causes motion and then causes it to spin. This can also be seen as the shell of a turtle, and everything is under that shell or connected to that shell, that mystery and the mystery hidden beneath, and the magic with magic and spirit. See, and that's where it gets complex, and I'm starting to get beyond the metaphor thing, but can also be seen as forms being put on a film and pushed, and light and energy, light being broadcast through it onto a projector. These are both metaphors, all for the same thing of how a moment manifests. But uh, see, this is one of them moments where stuff you don't get to see when I was just making videos. Because right now, that's is when I would have stood up and pushed stop. Oh, you out of here, Black Unigriffin? Peace. See you later. Um. So what was I? Yeah, this is one of the moments where I would have went. I would have pushed stop and tried to. Oh, okay. He was making fun of what I was talking about with the piece because, like, oh no, stop this one. Yeah, that's what would have happened. I feel like I just like it maybe would have wound up on a blooper reel, but it wasn't very funny. So let me start that summary of my metaphor once again. Let me, yeah. See, that would mind it. That tripping on my tongue, which happens occasionally, especially when I start wanting to say two words at once. Okay, so we're going to start the summary again. Metaphor is at the core of both magical spellcraft and divination. When we are casting a spell, we are creating a symbol, which is in some way a metaphor for our intent, the desire of what we want to happen. And this doesn't always take the place of a sigil. No matter what ritual takes place, when we are creating the form aspect of the spell, we are creating a metaphor for what we want to manifest. Right? This can take on the this can take on a very basic thing of a sigil. It can candle magic. And candle magic, that's literally what the form is with the candle that we've put the little sigils and all the different things on. However you work your candle magic, it's melting and burning is a metaphor for the process of creating the manifestation, creating the things that you want to manifest into your reality. And no matter what type of spellcraft we use, your fetish that you put on the wall and work with to bring things in, it's a metaphor for those things or a metaphor for something that will bring you those things. But then in divination, we are seeking this same pattern because every moment manifests through forms and concepts. And as it manifests, and the way everything twists and connects to each other, things work within synchronicity. And when a moment manifests, metaphors for that moment exist within the environment around it because of how things are connected, right? When something is going to happen, metaphors for it occur. But even on a informational level, these metaphors can be extrapolated by connecting symbols to the flow of fate connected to that moment. And in this case, the metaphor is your tarot card. Each tarot card is a metaphor for an idea. Each rune that I in the rune bag is a metaphor for an idea given a very basic symbol. Each sigil in my sigil rune charm bag thing, everything in there is in some way a symbolic metaphor for a concept, a flow. And when we do divination, we're connecting into that and drawing out through um, the way the line of fate of that moment connects the probability of what we reach into. We are pulling the metaphors connected to that moment into our hand and dealing them out, or yeah, dealing them out or casting them out with stones. But either way, it is once again a use of metaphor. And this understanding of metaphor should be part of how we find our understanding of reality. This is one of the base concepts of how even the material plane manifests into a moment. And so, as we learn to perceive the patterns, which tend to be cyclical seeming in nature, but are actually spirals, as we learn to perceive these moments, we can begin to understand what omens are. And omens are those moments when when the metaphor manifests in a physical moment. Often, when you are in alignment with the omen, you will feel it as if it is being presented to you, as if your perception is drawing you to that moment. And I said before that I don't think anything is um, communicating to you, but I think perhaps in these moments, your fullest self, however you want to call that, is the thing telling you, hey, look at this. Pay attention to this. And this metaphor is taking place before you. And when we see an omen, it is a metaphor that we are learned that that the omen is communicating through, right? It is a metaphor for a moment that is going to manifest. It is synchronicity in another form. Well, not even in another form. It's just a moment of synchronicity that predicts how the lines of fate will move or manifests. The metaphor manifests before the moment. And yeah, that is the core aspect of how reality itself even works. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the law of aesthetics. All life is an art form that takes place between life and death. That is what we are doing is we are walking within metaphor. We are symbolism in every moment. Everything that occurs is in a story that is a metaphor for another story that is connected to an interwoven mass, a litany of tales recited over and over again in a multidimensional sphere that each moment is its own. And this is where we find value and meaning is in that space of creating our own forms and ideas, our own expression and art of experiencing the interaction of all these different metaphors, right? I mentioned in the last live about how the Gnostics seem to think that part of why the material plane has no value is because everything is temporary. But it is in that temporarity, that impermanence, that we should find value because each of those temporary, impermanent moments are the only things that only happen once, right? Every moment in all of infinite only happens once in that particular way, in that exact form. That is the incredible complexity of all of this is that no matter how infinite it all is, nothing ever actually repeats. It's too complex. There's always backstory and to every moment and every no matter how much is replicated to be the same, the backstory is different, the context is different, the moment and synchronicity is different. No moment can ever be repeated. And so it is exactly in that impermanence of all things that creates the value of a moment, creates value within anything. If it lasts forever, it never was. That was a nice sounding paradox, but at the same time, there are things that don't fit directly within that paradox, right? But maybe there aren't, because there are things that are constant truths, but even those evolve and adapt, change in order to be maintained. There are things that have continued since the beginning, but they change, they adapt, they evolve. All things have been here since the beginning, just in different forms. Okay, so um find myself thinking about owls. We've definitely got way off of subject. And owls, that's part of what's going on there is a metaphor, yeah. It's part of why they are perceived the way they are in so many cultures is because they're out at night, which is a metaphor, direct metaphor for the unknown, or perhaps the unknown is a metaphor for the darkness, who knows? But one makes you think of the other, the unknown and darkness. We talk about it all the time with our language. I'm in the dark on that one. But the owl exists in that darkness, in that unknown. And that's what makes it such a great metaphor for forbidden knowledge. Like that's the way I've been taught about the owl. That's why it's taboo to have to make eye contact with the owl is because he is the bearer of forbidden knowledge. He is the one who is seeing the hidden things, and he's a perfect metaphor for it. And I mean that's not said directly in a lot of the other mythology about owls, but owls are also often associated with death and Hecate and different dark and spooky aspects, and that's how we feel about the unknown. There's a few things people fear more than the unknown, And that's what makes owls creepy is the metaphor, is the perfectness of that metaphor. Especially when you get into the English speaking culture and supposedly it's saying who, which doesn't sound that much like who to me, but that's what people tend to think of it as, and that perhaps asking a question. Um, yeah, he's the perfect metaphor for it. This is why he is seen in the occult as well. Why he is a perfect metaphor for the occult. Why you often hear about wizards and stories having owls as their familiars, because it's a wise being. It knows the unknown, just like a wizard. And so then the owl becomes a perfect metaphor for magic. It becomes a perfect metaphor for knowledge of the unknown by learning that information from an owl. And I suppose that's why I've never been afraid of the owl, even when I was taught to be. I mean, my nanny always had owls in her house, and my cousins, they didn't want to look at them. But I've always loved the owls. My connection ran nowhere near as deep until after my nanny's death, though, like I talked about in the last life with the animal totem spirits. But I've always loved owls. Very cool. I feel like there's got to be more I could say about the metaphors. There's definitely a few more things I could say about Joshua Wittershan, but I feel like I've said enough at this point. I'm going to be changing the things on his inside slowly over time with things that have positive life force energy that aren't going to stink and rot inside of there and continue just growing up that etheric form, which hopefully I'll be able to astral project into at some point and also at other times astral project alongside. We'll see how that all goes. It's going to be a very interesting project. Um, we talked about omens and how an omen is different when it's one that is drawn to you, and how that is a much more clear communication when you feel that moment of presentation. Something just pulls you in, like, pay attention to this. And a moment where you're just happen to see something that in and of itself has a symbolism, like me seeing a unicorn today or yesterday. Yeah, it's 11:15. It's not quite the day. It's not quite 2 days ago yet for me, anyways. And yeah, it is a less clear communication when you see something like that, and not always more about oneself or a moment of concern. Often, when you see the pay attention to this, it will be right after you've asked a question. Sometimes it can even be in response to your question. Like, for example, um, when I was, I believe, 18, I was still quite young. I had learned all the like, information. I felt like I'd gotten all the information I could from my family at by then. Like they were told me what they were going to tell me. My great grandfather told me I had said I had to be one of the said I had to be a Manitou. Went and died before I was born. So I was thinking about this, and I was like, you know, this is what I am. How am I supposed to understand it? What can I be? And I'm like, you know, get you Manitou, will you help me? And I thought this. I was outside, and just as I thought that, all of a sudden a shooting star came shooting across the sky and arced across the whole thing. And I whooped. And I'm like, wow! I'm not gonna scare everybody by actually whooping. There's someone up above me, above the studio. But that's one of them moments. I don't know if that really counts as an omen. Yeah, that was more a question of the into the universe. And the amount of lineup required for something like that is kind of a fascinating idea. But it reminds me of I felt like I wanted to tell at least one story tonight, and I finally remembered a story that I can tell. And actually, we'll tell a little more of the story than that. We're not going to tell about the full walkabout, but a few years ago, I went on a walkabout, and a big part of this walkabout was to connect with Trickster, Coyote, but also through the Giggler, which is now like connected to the Some Ones Have Been project. Oh, you can't quite see the Oshun. I think I can get away with that. Okay, there she is. There she is. I actually should have adjusted that a while ago. That's a little better. Um, okay. So part of that project was to connect with Trickster, but also to take Oshun from the river, like along Colorado River, to the ocean. And I obviously Colorado River does no longer connect to the ocean. It hasn't connected to the ocean for a very long time. But I was going to be on the Colorado River, and then from the river go to the ocean, which we're not going to get probably not going to get that far in the story tonight, like I said. But um, I started out on Lake Mead or Lake Mojave. Excuse me. There's Lake Mead, like on the Colorado River. It goes Lake Mead in Nevada, and then Lake Mojave, just below Lake Mead. And while I'm there, like I have my uncle just drop me off with my stuff, right? At Lake Mojave. Me, my stuff, and my dog. On the side of Lake Mojave in a place that my friends when I lived in the area and I when me and my friends lived in the area, we called that place Catfish Alley. We catch a lot of catfish there. Anyway, he drops me off at Catfish Alley, and while I'm there, there's just a bit there I want to tell about my work with Trickster, right? So I have this bowl, silver bowl that I'm bringing with me, and pepper wine that I've made. And I take this and I do a ceremony that I'm supposed to do on the edge of the sand in the lake, in the beach there. And I did the ceremony, and then I was told to bury the bowl and the pepper wine and leave them there and allow Trickster to do his part. So I do that. I do my part. I take the bowl and I put the things there under the sand and I leave. I come back later, like the next day, and you can see coyote tracks where he made a perfect circle around the whole bit, walked inside of it, dug up both the bowl and the pepper wine, opened the pepper wine and spilt it on the bowl, and actually even put the bottle back upside right. He didn't put the cork back on, but and anointed the bowl. And the bowl winds up being a big part of the whole ceremony. The bowl is that originally started with the DMT experience. Another story I'll tell another time. But anyways, I had the silver bowl and Trickster anointed it, which was pretty cool. Now, on to the main story I was going to tell for tonight, the bit that got my intuition got struck by. From there, I went from Lake Mojave very close up to the dam. It's an area called Willow Beach, and I didn't pedal all the way from Catfish Alley to below Hoover Dam because that's a very long paddle and it's all upstream. I did some of it, and then I had my friends that still lived in the area pick me up and drive me all the way to Willow Beach. And then from there, I got back in the water and pedaled all the way up to below the dam. And there's some hot springs there. And I was going to stay at the hot springs for a while as part of my walkabout. So I paddle up there. And like I say, it's there's the dam, there's Hoover Dam right there. So I paddle up to where the hot springs are. I pull my canoe up out of the water. Me and Cootie get out because I got my dog with me. And we go around this big rock. And by this point, I'm quite hungry. So I get a fire going. I'm making some food, everything's going good. And I walk around the rock to get something out of the canoe. And they actually occasionally let more water out of the dam, so the level will rise. I go around to get some stuff out of the canoe. My canoe is gone. Backpack is half in the water. I'm running up. I grab my backpack and pull it up onto the thing. Luckily, I brought my other backpack, like with my phone and stuff already. But and my canoe is gone, and the backpack's there. And I pull the backpack up, and I'm like, oh, okay, well now what? I'm like, well, might as well set up camp. Eventually I wasn't going to take the canoe all the way to the ocean with me anyways. So it kind of sucked that I lost the canoe, but I was like, well, I just have to backpack out of here. And then from here, get the ride to California. Cause I was still I'm going to ride to California. It's the modern day. I don't have to walk all the way there. So, um, that's what I'm thinking. I go to bed. I wake up the next day and I'm going up to the hot spring and I see this ranger and I was like, well, I might as well ask him about my canoe, if anybody's seen anything. And I go walking up to the guy and I'm like, hey, has anyone reported my canoe? Hey, March of Time. Glad to see you. Caught us in the middle of a story. So I tell the ranger, has anyone seen my canoe? He's like, oh, my, glad to see you. We thought we were looking for a body. Because they'd found my canoe empty, like, oh, it must be somebody fell in or whatever. So I get in I'm talking to the ranger. He offers to take me all the way back to the marina to get my canoe. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So I grab my dog and I have my lighter and a pack of cigarettes. And he just takes me like that, as I was, all the way back to Willow Beach Marina. And I get in the canoe and there's no paddle. And I think he thought must have thought I had a vehicle there that I was just going to go then put the canoe on the car and drive home or whatever. But I didn't. I was like, "Oh, I need an oar." And he's like, "Oh, okay." But they found me this oar, and I'm paddling all the way back up from Willow Beach back to my camp that is clear up by the hot spring, and it starts to get late. By this point, Cootie had gotten very good about being in the canoe. We had an incident at one point where she was laying in the canoe and somebody came past us. And they said hello, and she jumped on one side of the canoe to bark at him. We almost tipped. After that, she learned to be very good about staying still in the canoe. So we're paddling, but now it's getting late and it's getting dark, and we've gotten up to where there's just solid wall on both sides and river down the middle. And I'm paddling through that, and eventually it gets so dark that I can't see it all. And this is the part of the story that I thought about, is this moment of intuition and the way things line up sometimes that are just amazing. So I'm paddling, and all of a sudden I just feel this. 'Cause it's like Slot Canyon, pitch dark. I'm paddling in this canoe, no light of any kind, and I feel this understanding, like almost instruction to turn to the left and start going in. And I paddle and I go in, and rather than hitting wall where I thought I was gonna hit wall, I came across into some sand, and then finally there's a little bit of a gap because I hit a spot where there was like a crack, like large enough crack that there was some moonlight in there, and I could see the sand, and I pulled up into the sand there, and not only did I get drawn to this gap, but I get up there and there's a fire pit and there's a stone fire pit and a bunch of firewood all piled up there ready for me and everything. And it's just the amount of like almost planning that would have had to gone in to that moment for all them things to be there for me. And I'm not saying it was actually like planned out, right? But it was like the way things line up sometimes in those moments. It's fascinating. And that's the bit that I really wanted to tell, was that bit there. Like when I got all the way to the ocean, since I'm talking since I started the story anyways, and I don't think I'm ever just gonna want to come back and finish it all from right there. When I actually got to the ocean with that bowl, like I was talking about, it the wave came and took it. Like I was doing the thing where I'm supposed to bring the bowl to the ocean, and I'm talking to the waves and the ocean and doing like this little ritual thing. And right at the culmination of it, this extra large wave came up all the way to where the bowl was and just took it away off into the water, and off it went, which was pretty cool. The Oshun statue I had at the time, I actually wound up leaving at a hot spring in the area for people to come across with the same intent like before of people, like I mentioned, sometimes I'll leave a sigil or something in a place for people to find, for them to wonder what it is and how it got there. And that's what I did with the Oshun statue, with a place that had been pre-planned from before I left, that I would take it all the way to the ocean and then leave it at that hot spring. And it's same as the one up there. That I've never sought one out, but they just they come to me. And that's not a being that I typically talk about, because of a cultural appropriation thing. That's not someone I publicly work with, but she was part of the story, so I told it. It's a closed system which I am not a part of, but at the same time, if a being comes to me and wants to work with me, I'm not going to tell it no simply because of its race, simply because of it being connected to a certain race. That's not how that works. You know, for me, it doesn't. The rights of spirits, no matter where they come from, are just as significant as the rights of any other being. All things which perceive have rights. Like I was saying before, even your tulpas and servitors, if they once they develop self awareness, they eventually become part of the audience. So they matter just as much as anyone else. So it's important that we treat all beings with respect. And I feel like it would be disrespectful of me to that being to be like, no, I won't work with you because you're from this or that. But I also don't go around trying to teach about those beings, you know, with the exception of Eshu insisted that I talk about his connection to, oh my gosh, I forgot the guy's name, that old blues player. Oh my gosh, I gotta. Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson, the one that said he sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. He didn't. He made a deal with Eshu, and Eshu taught him to play by possessing him and using his fingers. How many mysterious things are there out in the world? Everything is a mystery. Everything is a mystery. Everything is part of the. Well, you weren't here for that part of the video, but I talked about the word Manitou, which is an Ojibwe word. It means sorcerer, turtle, mystery. But there's also a metaphor in that word of the shell that encompasses everything. It also means spirit, right? But all them words are connected in this metaphor of interconnectedness that is part of all things. Magic and spirit and mystery is what makes up reality, right? All things are mysterious. Everything has has a hidden backstory. All things have context which you do not fully comprehend. And I realize you mean more like cryptids, like the thing about unicorns. Yes, unicorns do exist in more than one form. In the case of the one that I saw today, it did need a material form to manifest upon, which was a deer with one straight horn on its head. I couldn't tell you if it was in the middle for sure or not. It may have just been off to one side, but it definitely only had one, and it came up just like a pedestal. It wasn't pointed at the top; it was flat and still in velvet. So a growth that is, I saw that as a metaphor for new growth of that primal purity and truth and, well, hope. It's like how water is good water if there are frogs living in it. Path is a good path if there are unicorns along it. But yeah, everything is full of mystery. Um, okay, we're definitely gonna have to open everything up to comments, questions, and concerns at this time. It's getting close to the 3 hour mark, and I have a few things I need to do still today, apparently. Dinner is really calling to me, and it sounds like I might be cooking dinner for Felix and I still. So, you know, normally we have a wonderful roommate who does a food program and cooks dinner every night, but she wasn't able to do that tonight, it seems. So, looks like I'll be cooking some dinner when I get off of the live. But that's cool, you know. I'm not complaining, to be clear. You know, she's not always able to do it. You can't expect a 100% success rate from anyone. And yes, I am quite sleepy myself. Okay, so like I said, comments, questions, concerns, anything else that needs to be addressed before I go? Give that a few minutes. I'll smoke a whole bowl here. I do have an interest in aliens, but I once stumbled upon someone's research on psionics and other stuff. Apparently, what he found out aliens is that they use some advanced form of shamanism. Maybe there is a lot of theory that that's why we're seeing lights in the sky and energy things. Is that these are essentially um, super enhanced versions of essentially astral projection. Like it's an energetic projection that they are directing all the way here. There has been some theories about that. Um, I actually have an alien story, but another time. I saw something once that very well could have been an alien. But like I say, another time. Because it looks like it is time for me to go ahead and get off the live pretty soon here. But I think it's an interesting theory that they are astral projections, some kind of energetic projection and not their actual physical forms. But I don't know. Aliens are not something I have thoughts and ideas, and my past life recall, if it should be trusted to going back that far, would certainly allow for the possibility for that to still be a thing. Though if my own memories are to be believed, it was a very, very long time ago, and they weren't actually able to get to this solar system at this point with the technology they had at that time. But that was also a very, very long time ago. But also, that's before we lost connection to the audience and things were balanced properly then, you know, and the balance of this reality gets thrown off kilter. Did that affect the aliens, or is like their planet another reality completely separate? I don't know. Those are things I don't have answers to. Certainly something I think about a lot, wonder about, but nothing I have any direct answers to. Like I said, I have a story, but I think we'll save that till next time. Okay, so had a good time. I really appreciate all those of you who have stuck with me throughout the whole live. I feel like we covered some important subjects with the metaphor. That is literally the most important subject of it all in a lot of ways. Understanding that idea of how we can manifest a moment through metaphor and how metaphor manifests a moment. This is part of how the whole weird turns. So, hopefully, some of you got something out of the stuff that I've said tonight in the live and the discussions that we've had. Um, I feel like talking about it and explaining things also expands my understanding. So, this is very valuable to me in a lot of ways. And I just want to thank you all for being part of that and helping expand the general understanding of what magic is. So, with that in mind, I hope I see you all next time. Bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.